Right, they are horrible laws. They're the worst laws that we've come by in perhaps since slavery. We definitely need to change them, and I am so excited about the possibility of changing these laws. We started LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, in 2002, and now it's 7 years later, and we've got well over 15,000 members in 76 countries. We're composed of police, judges, prosecutors, prison wardens, even DEA and FBI agents and others who want to end the war on drugs. We want to legalize all drugs because we look at this from the viewpoint of law enforcement, and we know that when we ended alcohol prohibition in 1933, Al Capone and all his smuggling buddies were out of business the next day. They were off our streets. They were no longer out there killing each other to control that very lucrative market. They were no longer killing us cops charged with fighting that useless war. And they were no longer killing our children caught in crossfire and drive-by shootings, all the things we experience today with this new prohibition. So we know we could end the violence by legalizing the drugs. And then when we regulate the drugs, and of course you can't regulate or control anything while it's illegal. So we legalize it, then we regulate it, and by regulating it, we can end overdose deaths. Nobody has to die from an overdose of drugs. That's the saddest thing about these things. I've spent 14 years living in the street with these folks undercover, and I can tell you the reason they die from an overdose is because they don't know how much of that tiny package of powder they're purchasing is really the drug and how much of it is the cutting agent. You get too much drug in that package, you're dead. And in an illegal, unregulated market, they will never know what's in that package. We can also affect these horrible diseases, AIDS and hepatitis. According to the Center for Disease Control, half of all new cases can be traced directly back to drug users sharing needles. Well, if drugs were legal, they wouldn't have to do that. And we could prevent half of all the potential cases of these terrible diseases. Think of the lives we'd save. And then if we treat drug abuse as a health problem instead of a crime problem, and a health problem is exactly what it is, we could actually help these people, mostly young, mostly people of color, who we've been arresting to the tune of 1.9 million of them every year. In the 40 years of the war on drugs, it's now 39 million arrests and counting. And it's cost us more than $1 trillion to do this. What if we legalized drugs today and next year we spent $70 billion to create mandatory minimum, say, education for everyone? How about mandatory minimum health care for everyone? How about talking about some form of just a very basic, decent housing that every human being deserves? You know, you could do things like that with $70 billion a year. Instead, we spend that money to destroy their lives. If you spend the money to give people hope for the future, can you imagine how many fewer drug users you'd have? What the drug warriors are asking us to do when they say we are going to end the drug problem is they're asking us to rescind the laws of supply and demand. They're asking us to change human nature. Drugs have been part of what humans have done since the beginning of time, and it will always be part of what humans do. The point isn't to try to get rid of all these drugs and make them go away, not exist anymore. The point is to learn to live with this in a manner that causes the least amount of harm. And once you cut through the myths about what drugs are and what drugs aren't, you find that there's no rhyme or reason to why we pick which drugs are going to be prohibited. You know, even coffee was prohibited at one time, and back in 1550, and quite a few years after that. In Europe, it was a capital offense to possess coffee. Capital offense. Imagine what that would be like if we had that law today. The two most dangerous drugs known to humans are legal drugs. Alcohol is the second most dangerous drug we know of, and nicotine and tobacco is the first most dangerous drug we know of. Both perfectly legal, both regulated. In the United States today, still 430,000 people die every year from ingesting tobacco smoke. 85,000 people die in this country every year from ingesting alcohol. And I'm not talking about getting drunk and running off the road or killing yourself or somebody else. That's different stats. This is just from ingesting that drug. Alcohol is a poison. It eats holes in your liver, it eats holes in your brain, and it will kill you in the end. And sadly, it happens to be my drug of choice, but we all have our problems there, I guess. But the point that I want to make is the deaths caused by the ingestion of all the drugs we call illegal in this country in 1 year amounts to about 12,000. Now, this is a long way from the problems of alcohol and tobacco, and yet alcohol and tobacco are legal drugs. And we maintain at LEAP that if these other drugs were legal, nobody has to die of an overdose because, as I just said, they die because they don't know what's in that package. So we wouldn't even be killing anywhere near that many people a year if these drugs were legal. And then, you know what we call these substances? We call them controlled dangerous substances. Well, the truth is, it's exactly the opposite. It is totally uncontrolled dangerous substances. If you want to talk about controlled substances, talk about a stick of gum. That's a controlled substance. You know, you can't manufacture a stick of gum in the United States without abiding by all kinds of regulations for how that stick of gum will be created, what's going to be in it, what's not going to be in it. But we have no rules or regulation whatsoever of how heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, or the other dangerous drugs, as we say, are created and how they're distributed. People who are still working in the trade of law enforcement, who join us as speakers, are the most courageous people among us. And only about 10% of our membership, law enforcement membership, and also about 7% of our speakers are actually currently employed law enforcers. They're wonderful, wonderful people. One that I would point out is Neil Franklin, who's a working state police major in Maryland. Terrific guys on our board of directors. Yeah, we want as many speakers as we can get, and mostly those people end up being retired. But if they're not, if they have the courage to come forward while they're still working, it has much more impact, it's true.
Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. These men and women have served in the trenches of the drug war as prosecutors, judges, cops, guards, and wardens. They have seen firsthand the utter futility of our policy and now work together to end drug prohibition. Please visit leap.cc.